Okay, welcome to Exile. Today we have with us, as part of our interview series, Mr. Lloyd D'Aguilar, longtime human rights activist and radio talk show host. Today we will continue with our part one of our interview session that was done last year. This being the new year, and we will continue on that. And part of the discussion had to do mainly with the government corruption that has been impeding the Jamaica's growth and has creating hardship for the Jamaican population. Prior to that, a couple of few shows back, we had also discussed about the dire condition that was gonna be uh, uh, be part of the Jamaican economy because uh, Bank of Jamaica had indicated that they only had a limited amount of foreign exchange, and given their burn rate compared to their reserves, we had calculated that last October would be they would run out. However, uh, even with COVID-19 pandemic causing a disruption in the flow of foreign exchange to Jamaica's economy, they were able to sustain themselves, and to the large part due to the contributions of the Jamaican diaspora. So that begs the question that are is the diaspora willing to continue to endure this kind of corruption, taxation without representation? I think that is something that we would like to explore in this episode. Without further ado, I'll hand this to Raymond, our my co-host and resident exile.
Okay, thank you, Eso. Good morning to our listeners. Good morning to Lloyd. And we had thought that the COVID-19 would bring some kind of fiscal and monetary crisis to Jamaica. They would run out of foreign exchange and so on. These were based on the calculations from the Bank of Jamaica earlier in the year, the predictions. Anyway, they predicted drop in remittances did not happen. As a matter of fact, in some cases, I think it has increased, and I can understand that as a member of the diaspora. If you have loved ones in Jamaica or relatives who, for what because of the virus, have lost their jobs and have run into severe financial difficulties, you turn around and help them. So people stepped up to the plate, and so we were wrong in our prediction, but happily wrong. Jamaica has been able to muddle through based solely on remittances, mostly for the foreign exchange. I mean, some IMF support and some other inputs. But tourism, which was the mainstay of the economy, still is non-existent. Leaders of in the new year, the leaders of the diaspora organizations expressed hope and optimism about this year, because at the time it was things were going pretty well in controlling the virus. The vaccines had started to come out, so there was a lot of hope and optimism. So there was a feeling, I think, that things would just return to how it was pre-COVID. Tourism would return. It had actually started to return. Donald Trump was gone. So we would return to the status quo pre-Donald Trump, pre-COVID. There doesn't seem to me in the messages that I read online, and I read all of them from the diaspora leaders, there did not seem to be a commitment to change. It was more, okay, we got through that, we can go back to how we were. It's going to be a great year. Well, lo and behold, it's not turning out to be a great year. The virus is having some issues in its rollout. There's delays, certainly in Canada for sure, and in the US there's problems. The virus itself has sprung two new variants, COVID B117, which is in Canada now, and which is apparently 70% more infectious than the original COVID. And there is another variant that I think comes from South Africa, which also is supposed to be more contagious. The issue is, though, that fortunately so far, if the virus does not mutate too much more into more wider variants, the current vaccines seem to be working on the current variants. How long that will last is another story. So I think, I hope I'm wrong again, but I think this is going to be, according to what the infectious disease specialists, independent of government, say. The government ones are trying to keep things going, saying, oh, don't panic, it'll be okay. But the ones outside the government, who are the ones who have been correct before, have said that the situation is going to be much worse.
Okay.
We hope we're wrong, but that is the situation. So I think that I will not join in that hope and optimism. Now, in the last program, on this topic, which is corruption in Jamaica and the search for solutions, part 2, specifically the role of the diaspora in this, we came to the conclusion that we have to make a change to the system. And the question is, if we're calling for this revolutionary change, what form will that change take? Are we talking violent revolution? Are we talking changing to what? I think we need to focus in this program more on solutions. Everybody knows the problems of Jamaica. It's been analyzed to death and so on. So I'm thinking in this program, we should focus on some solutions. And if Lloyd, if you could come, I have some ideas, but if Lloyd, if you could come in here and make some suggestions as to what you think from your point of view as a man on the ground in Jamaica, as an activist, human rights and activist, and a poverty activist in Jamaica, and a radio talk show host, you are right there on the ground. You get the input and the feel from all the people. So I'll hand it over to Lloyd now.
Yes, well, it's good to be here and to have this exchange and to be connected to the diaspora and looking at it from where we are here in Jamaica, from my particular perspectives. Corruption, since we last spoke, has gotten worse. And it's exposed on a daily basis because we have, according to our system, we have an Auditor General. And the Auditor General is responsible for doing audits of the 190 bodies that we have in Jamaica. So we have 190 public bodies that are connected to the state that use government funds, and they are responsible for sending in yearly audits or assessments of their doings. And very few of them actually are up to date with their audits and their reports to the central body. And when the central body, through the Auditor General, does its report on what's happening, it's frightening. The way money is mismanaged, the way money is spent, the lack of accounting, the lack of documentation. I mean, it's really mind-blowing. And as has been said before by other international organizations monitoring the situation here in Jamaica, at least $283 million US per year in terms of the funds is siphoned off into the pockets of individuals. That is their estimate. Transparency International just recently released another report, and Jamaica still occupies the position that it did previously, with a little, a slight gain here, but that is insignificant and means nothing. So Jamaica, for all intents and purposes, is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And, we are seeing the details even more so than we see before within the past month or so, based upon these reports that are given in Parliament. The fact, however, is that these reports don't take us anywhere because we don't have any organization that is driven by the fight against corruption, using their powers, being willing to confront those who need to be confronted, take them before the courts legally, try to prosecute them, and set an example in terms of how we need to fight corruption. That doesn't exist. We have several institutions, but for all intents and purposes, they have weaknesses. And at the end of the day, they don't really, none of them individually or collectively are able to confront the system of corruption. So we have a serious problem. And in the midst of this COVID pandemic and crisis, where people are losing their jobs, the state is short of funds to take care of health and education and other social needs, the hygiene and water supply and so on and so forth, is getting worse and worse and worse. Where it's going is anybody's guess in terms of whether at some point in time the people will say enough is enough. But they are also in a crisis situation because they're losing their jobs and that sort of thing. And the other aspect to this thing is that the state is becoming more and more repressive, because if the people are not adhering to the lockdown measures and rules and that sort of thing, they are relying more and more on the security forces to go out and enforce these lockdown measures. And I think enough is enough. People are not, it's just impossible for people not to socialize with each other and to tell people about social distancing and that sort of thing. It's just really impossible. And we're seeing it happening in many other countries where people say enough is enough, and they're out there on the streets protesting and so on. And I think Jamaica is no different. And it's just a matter of when people are going to say enough is enough, and they're going to go out there and say we can't deal with this anymore, because the state is not living up to its responsibility, having locked down the economy and trying to impose solutions that will not work. And we can talk about that as well. But the vaccine solution is not a solution, and it's going to create more problems. And a lot of Jamaicans are very skeptical about the vaccine, and a lot of them are not going to take the vaccine.
Given that being the case, how do you see, let's say, if we look into 2022, 1 year from now, if the population is not taking the vaccine, they're not doing social distancing, the virus continue to spread, which will probably make it so that the cruise lines and the will be unlikely to be reopened. Tourism will be dead, and the corruption is siphoning off all this money that's supposed to go to the people. The people, apart from social distancing to prevent the virus spread, I'm sure for those people who violate the quarantine is that they have to make a living. If the government is not supporting them, like for instance, just to comparison in Canada, where their unemployment is extended and it's embellished, and the U.S. is stimulus. If Jamaica doesn't have a similar thing, people, if they're going hungry at home, being quarantined, they got to do something, right? So unless you make it, as you put it, obviously the program is not sufficient enough to address that problem. I think it's probably a problem that's beyond just socializing. It's probably a matter of livelihood. So if that's the case, you're painting a very dire picture. If this is a trajectory that would probably see the Jamaica go the way of the herd immunity through infection and death. So allow the virus to go rampant throughout the population, kill off the people that uh, 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 cannot deal with it health wise, and then the rest of them are infected and damaged in a certain way. But the survivor of the fittest will remain to stay. Is that how you see the situation?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me just say something that Jamaica, there are statistics that are put out almost on a weekly, twice, three times weekly, in terms of the infection rate and so on. Uh, uh, I don't think more than 20,000 people have been infected, or maybe 30,000 have been infected with the virus. Um, More than 50% have recovered. Um, Maybe 300 or 400 people have died, and there are some people who are in the hospitals recovering from it, statistically speaking. And so I think there is a kind of indifference sometimes to the fear and that the government is trying to use to get people to comply and so on. So that is an issue in terms of people complying with what it is that the government wants. The other thing, of course, is that the economy is not getting any better because, as you were saying, tourism is in a bad state, and many other industries that are affected are closing down. Revenue into the government coffer is becoming less. They are not prepared to tax the rich. They're not prepared to deal with the debt problems which we face. Fortunately, as you were saying, the remittances from the diaspora is about the same, or maybe has increased a couple percentage points. But as good as that is, it is not enough to prevent us from sliding into an economic crisis that is on the agenda.
So the forecast for 2022 is several steps towards a economic crisis. Now, how do you see this economic crisis play out, though? We're looking at again probably the rich not being taxed, so they'll be doing fine and probably do better. And then, of course, the percentage of the population that join the poverty level and below is going to get greater and greater. So, given that being the case, we're looking at a consistently worse trajectory for 2002, 2003, 2004. So, where is this going to lead to? What's going to happen eventually?
Well, let me tell you this. I have a radio program, and people are now calling me and say, when will be the revolution? Because that's what you're asking me.
Right.
Because
when will be the revolution?
When will the revolution come? Because we're ready for the revolution. This is what they call and they say. I mean, those kinds of statements are becoming more and more regular. Because the people have decided that the two political parties are the same. There's really no difference between them.
Mm-hmm.
The both of them are bankrupt in ideas. I think the general consensus of people who call my program is that, that they're not being inspired one way or another by the two political parties. There's also crime issue, violence issue, and they don't really address the root cause of violence in this society. And that is very transparent. And the reason they don't address the root cause of violence is really because they don't have the money to spend on the social issues that is causing the violence and so on. So they would talk about spending money on the security forces and, preparedness and all that kind of stuff, but never about going into the communities, dealing with the unemployment amongst the youth, their lack of education, and all the other social issues that are there that really need focused attention on intense intervention, it doesn't exist. And so you ask that question, I think the people are more and more and more beginning to, you know, incorporate that in terms of where they stand and how they're likely to respond when the situation gets worse.
And it seemed like the situation is not, it is going to get worse
It
by
is
your
going to get
estimation,
worse.
and
It is
it'll
going
continue
to
to
get
do
worse.
so.
It is going
Okay.
to get worse.
The progressive movement in Jamaica, you know, as represented by Trevor Monroe, the Horace Leavies et al., one would think they would be an option for the people and actually be leading the people. But in this path towards change and maybe revolution, certainly revolutionary change, whether violent or otherwise. But as Lloyd stated on his program on the 4th of January, their New Year messages, in spite of the existing crisis, seems very bland. They seem to have been co-opted. Would you say that is correct, Lloyd? And if that is so, then what form do you think this revolution will take? Like, for example, when the struggle for independence was happening, they, on the bus stand, the other people, the OT Flair Cloughs and the 4-H's and all that, they, in the late 50s, the Jamaica Progressive League, which was the main Jamaican diaspora organization at the time in New York, and most Jamaicans emigrated to New York in those days, financed the formation of the People's National Party to lead the charge to independence. What do you see happening in Jamaica? Is there that same, I mean, if we have a kind of just Arab Spring rioting in the streets and total chaos without any form and leadership so that can coalesce into change, do you see that happening, or is it just going to be widespread rioting and looting and shooting and craziness?
You know, that's a very good question and a discussion that really needs to be had, because, you know, I think there are differences between a Jamaica and when I look on the television sometimes, the news and Lebanon or even Burma, Myanmar at the moment. The military has locked down the country. They have arrested the leader of the country. And it took a little while, a couple of days, but after that, you see organization, you see people coming out on the street, you see right throughout the whole country, thousands of people are out there and they're protesting and they're focusing on the leadership. Also, I would say that in Haiti, you have a president that the people say you are corrupt, you were not elected properly, and you need to go. And the people have been protesting over a period of time. Of course, the president has been using violence against them, using criminal violence. But the protests against him has intensified recently. Now you come to Jamaica, and despite the fact that the people are feeling the brunt of what's happening, politically, we are not on the same level as Myanmar or as Haiti or some other countries, in the sense of since 1938, when we had general labor strikes and so on. We have had some protests, but we have never, I think it's only once in our history that we have had what you could call a general strike. And this was in the 1980s, early 1980s, under the Siaga administration, when Siaga laid off thousands of public sector workers. And the unions decided that we were going to have a general strike. And they had a one-day general strike, or 1.5 days. It didn't last very long because of the political divide between the trade unions. And we're still suffering from that in terms of alternative leadership to the existing system. And you mentioned Trevor Monroe and you mentioned Horace Levy, and I mentioned them before. But these are not these are individuals and organizations that have somehow linked with one side or the other of the political divide and is not able to, radically disassociate and say, listen, the two political parties have got to go. And so what that does, and this is the other part now, that part is if you don't have that kind of leadership that can centralize, that can bring the people out, that can engage in peaceful protest and take it to the next level, then what you are inviting is that in the inner cities where somebody has a gun and you may call him a criminal, but he's not 100% a criminal because he's an individual, he has a mind, etc., etc. And there may very well come a time when the gun, the social issues, the lack of a political ability, a lack of an ability to politically organize and mobilize people creates the conditions for not just killing one another, but taking on the state. And I would say one more thing is that the police have used violence against the people over a long period of time. And they always claim, well, the gunman shot at me and therefore I shot back and I killed him. And so always there was a claim that, it was a shootout. Well, I will just say in response to that is not true, because if people were really shooting at policemen, we would now have a very serious political crisis on our hands. And, the police themselves are kind of creating that scenario where they are under attack, but they are not under attack. But then if you were to take them at their word that they're under attack, then that is an option that is always there at some point in time, but has not happened. I don't know if you see where I'm going with that, but I'm just saying that at this point in time, I can't tell you. Well, I'll say one more thing. The police go into an area and they shoot somebody, and the people will protest and they will block the road. They'll probably sometimes burn a police car and so on. But it is centered on that particular area, right? It is never like what happens in the United States with the Black Lives Matter movement, that thousands of people come out and they said, this is racism. You can't be doing this to Black people. White people are out there, Black people are out there, in between different colors, etc., ethnic groups. But when these things happen in Jamaica, it's focused on a particular area. It rarely ever becomes generalized. And that is why I give myself credit, because when the thing happened in Tivoli Gardens, I tried to generalize it and to let all of Jamaica know that this was an issue that they had to treat as if it happened to them personally. And we have to use it to confront the system. So those are some of the political and tactical issues that confront the people right now in terms of how to deal with this worsening crisis as it develops.
Well, it seemed like what has been going on has been less than tolerable, to the extent where majority of the people in Diaspora seem to have indicated, as I discussed with Raymond, that although they wish to go back to Jamaica as retirement or to visit, whatever, they're held back based on the prevalence of crime, that they feel unsafe there, that they do not do that. And secondly, the issue is that seems to be plenty of opposition, as we have explored, that around 70% of the people did not even vote in the general election. And now that you've shared with us that the majority of your listeners are saying, where's the revolution? So, however, despite that, you have also indicated that they're fragmented. They're very much fragmented, and they're still very much focused on their own area of interest, and not recognize that they actually share a common interest, right?
Yeah, you see, I
And
think
in the case of most of the successful revolution or successful overhaul of the government, it has always been led with a vision, because it's everybody can complain, oh, this is not right, that's not right. However, unless you have a vision of what the alternative is, if you could see the alternative, in the case of Iran, the Ayatollah came back and said Islam is the alternative, and we will be able to take this corrupt government that's U.S. backed, and then we will have a much better a much better society for Iranians, right? Or in Russia, they thought that the czar is totally disconnected, and we are suffering. We're slaves to the system, while these people are abusing us and murdering us, right? So and then the communists presented a vision, and the population is able to rally behind that vision. But it seemed like there's no such vision involved. Even in a smaller scale, like for instance, I just share what I know. In that I lived in Singapore for a long period of time. In Singapore, again, I bring this up a few times. They got their independence in '65, so similar timeline as Jamaica. But their leader, Lee Kuan Yew, was Oxford educated, came back to Singapore and realized that, that there can be a better life, and he crafted a vision of Singapore to be a island of stability in a sea of instability. Like because in that region, all around are Islamic countries, are very corrupt government and so on. So he had figured out that his vision was that if we are able to create stability in this region, the foreign investment will come, because the population, the market is here. And he was right. And because people bought into his vision, he was able to go in. And at that time, Singapore and Jamaica has a similar population base. And he rooted out the worst criminal gangs and triads and whatnot, right? Gangsters and all that. He rooted them out. He overhauled the government and basically banished corruption by paying the elected officials above or industry executive wages, and having very, very harsh laws against corruption. And within the same period of time between then and now, as you well know, Singapore is one of the main players financially and economically in that region, for a population again with no natural resources whatsoever. You know, so again, a vision, it seems to be missing right now, and the opposition or the disenfranchised poor are all fragmented, and you need that lightning rod. But you're saying that you do not see any sign of that anywhere nearby.
Well, and just add very quickly to that point, it's like those are the issues that need to be addressed. Okay, so I'm not one of those who like there are people who call the program and they said, Jamaican people, them this, them, I don't look at it that way. When I'm out on the streets and I talk with people, I'm in the taxis, the people are very upset about the corruption that they see around them. They understand their economic situation, etc. But as we were saying before, leadership is what they don't have. So let's deal with the lack of leadership, why there is lack of leadership, rather than condemn the people, as some people do. The people are, they are slaves, they're confused, they just don't want to fight, etc. It's not really true, and that's not my assessment. It's a question of leadership, which is lacking.
Right.
So Lloyd, The real question then that should be asked is not when is the revolution coming, or the real question should be uh, who is going to lead the revolution, and what is going to be the vision or the goal of that revolution. In other words, the person leading the revolution will have to, like Lee Kuan Yew and some other people in other countries have done, they have to personify the vision, and as Asa said, and come to lead it. Like again, I come back to the example of the independence movement in Jamaica in late 50s and very, very early 60s that led to the independence in 62. Norman Manley, who led it, came into the equation as you know, educated in England, all that, although I don't think education per se is a formal education anyway in some foreign universities necessary, but he was well respected as a lawyer in Jamaica, and he came in first to represent Bustamante in his legal trials, because Bustamante was causing a lot of rioting and furor, or leading it anyway, and if he was causing it. So now the thing is, so he, with the financial support of the diaspora, you see my point? So it would seem to me, if we were to learn from history, what we need is a diaspora that is, first of all, we need a leader, as you say, leadership to come forward or to spring up out of this feeling. And then we need that person, unless they're a particularly wealthy individual, they are going to need not just the support of the people, the grassroots support, and that is vital and more important than anything else, but there's going to be a need for some financial support, and I think some of the technical and other expertise that is available in the diaspora. And because you see, if a new party or a new leader or a new politician appears on the scene presenting a real attractive alternative to the status quo to the Jamaican people, this is going to pose a real threat to the existing establishment and the existing order. And the spin doctors of the mass media, they controlled by the same interests that control the politics in Jamaica. They get into gear. They start to precondition the minds of Jamaicans with twisted truths and lies, and they will manipulate the people if we're not careful. And so the people will succumb to this propaganda, and that, I think, is why, one of the reasons why third parties in Jamaica always peter out. They never go anywhere. That's one of the reasons. There's other reasons.
Well,
Some of
I
them
mean
have been valid
that
parties, really, having
yeah,
some.
that has been the issue worldwide, and one of the democracies that's most reviewed, like the U.S. Uh, Something has cropped up in the recent few years, is that the main prime example is AOC, uh, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, I believe, is the full name. She was recruited. She was a bartender, not Harvard educated, not Oxford educated, whatever. She was a bartender. She was recruited by this organization that was looking for leadership. There was an organization that was set up scanning the population in the various districts in New York, looking for leadership. They found her, convinced she was a former supporter of Bernie Sanders, so she got recognized. And when she ran her campaign, she had 1/10 of the money of the incumbent, and the incumbent was supposed to be the next in line for the lead, Speaker of the House,
Mm-hmm.
and yet she won
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
strictly through door knocking, through the social media, and all the basically non-money denominated kind of the tactics. Now, if you were to say that Jamaican 70% of the Jamaicans did not vote, if you're able to have a vision that captures their imagination
Mm-hmm.
and able to present an alternative that is viable, plausible, and doable. They could easily beat them because the party that won the last election got the majority of 30%, which may be 16 to 18% of the populist vote. Just by having someone who's able to capture the imagination of, let's say, half of the 70%, you got 30%, that's a landslide. You know what I mean? So it's a matter of the idea that we can do it, that you can do it. And to mobilize would be actually even easier because the population, the voting population is so lopsided that if you're able to capture only one third of the people who didn't vote, that is already a majority already. So it's a matter of taking a page out of this, the new technology, social media, which is basically, totally much more inexpensive than television and other things. And if you can mobilize the population, if they are motivated to do the door to door or to do the, the man, mobilize the manpower and get the vote, it is actually possible.
We're going to have to end the program
But,
shortly. Our time is running out.
but perhaps what we'll do is we'll get Lloyd's take on what I just
Yeah.
said, and
I
then
was
we'll
just
wrap
gonna
it up
say,
from there.
I'm just gonna
Okay?
say we're gonna wind up
Yeah.
now. Lloyd, if you'll have the last word.
Yes, well, those are some very deep insights that you've just raised that really require equally deep response, to get to
Okay.
the root of what we're dealing with. And you had all kind of thoughts going through my head because the type of program that I have on radio is one where I insinuate revolution all the time. I use
Right.
music that use the word revolution. I use Dennis
Right.
Brown. It takes a revolution to make a solution. I use chronics that talk about capitalism. I use, Bob Marley, and so on and so forth. Tracy Chapman, all the music that uses the word revolution and so on. And it is grabbing people's attention. And as I said before, one of the things that I've been doing is that I formed what I call the People's Anti-Corruption Movement. So far it's on paper, but it's there. And it's being used to attract people. I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister explaining that we need a commission of inquiry into corruption. And we need a people's forensic audit of the debt because the debt is corrupt and the people are paying for the debt. I tried to send copies of of that letter to the rest of the political ruling class. And I keep saying to my listeners that sooner or later, we are going to have a protest where we're going to march to, whether it's a parliament or wherever, to say, fine, we have called for people's, commission of inquiry into corruption. What are you going to do about it, etc. And I get always a positive response from people in terms of, yes, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. Of course, it's kind of difficult to do that from radio, but you have to exploit it for whatever it's worth. But, just in closing, I would say that it is a movement like that that you really need, that captures the imagination of people. And this corruption issue is a big, big thing. And it's impacting on employment and other forms of poverty, so that if you can connect those things together and say, listen, we have to make a statement on this particular issue, or come next week or next month or wherever it is. I think that that's the stage where we are right now. And if the diaspora is supportive of that, Lloyd de Aguilar is trying his thing. And if you guys can, assist when the time comes, I am grateful because I'm ready to take off my hat, throw it in the ring, and do what is possible and what is necessary.
Yeah. See, when the situation is bad, it's just like when the room is too hot. Everybody figures we need a change, but you got to tell them, hey, the change is to put on, take off this cloak of corruption, take off this coat of faulty government structure, right? Then you're able to, oh yes, that's what I have to do. That's the role of the visionary, to be able to allow people to formulate what the change looks like. Because if you just say I need change, everybody agrees they need change. But if you don't tell them what the change looks like and what the process of the change will be, then people will go, okay, they'll keep asking for change, but they'll got nothing to change to.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're gonna have to end it there. Thank you, Asa. Thank you very much, Lloyd. We will continue to work with you and to, 'cause we know you champion Jamaica's cause, and we invite our listeners and our viewers to click the subscribe button to stay up to date on new programs as they come out, as well as give us your comments if you like what we're doing or agree with what we're saying. Click the like button. If you don't, you can say why and the comments. We welcome comments because we want to make this program the best that it can be. So thanks to you all, and we look forward to talking to Lloyd again in the future and keeping up with what is happening in Jamaica as the coronavirus and the economic implications of it continue to buffet Jamaica. Thanks again, all. Cheers.
In the meanwhile, keep the faith. There can be a better tomorrow as long as we all work towards it. Yeah.
Cheers.